Hey everyone, Tony D. With another In 10 Minutes, I'm going to attempt to explain Brexit. Um, don't really need 10 minutes to explain it, and I'm no expert, but I do follow YouTubers online who talk about this pretty regularly. So, the European Union is made up of a bunch of countries in Europe, and they have become increasingly more centralized towards the European Union. It's slowly rolled into almost a United States of Europe, and that centralization has begun to take its toll on the member countries over the years, because that centralization means that the rulers of the European Union can dictate what the individual countries do. So, for instance, one of the big issues in England was that other countries were fishing in their waters, and certain English fishermen couldn't fish in their own waters that they'd been fishing literally for hundreds of years. So that was a huge issue, and there wasn't really a lot of accountability for the European Union in Brussels. So you couldn't, like, for instance, vote for somebody else and then get them to give you your rights back, or water rights back, or whatever you want to call them. So, and that was just one instance amongst many that the Brits didn't like. The upshot of the European Union was they had a European currency, the euro. They had free travel between the states, the countries, and you didn't need a passport. So it was like the United States in that respect. But, initially the European Union was more for trade and for travel like that. But it's gone way beyond that. So the Brits took up the Brexit vote, and this was led mostly by Nigel Farage, who's a political figure in the UK. How would I describe him? He's a little bit like he's more of a conservative type. There's more, breaks in parties over there. I guess here you would call him probably one of the he'd probably be a Republican, but he'd be like a libertarian Republican. He'd be like a little bit like Rand Paul in some respects, kind of like Rand Paul mixed with Rush Limbaugh, because he was very good at getting attention to himself, and he made this his main issue. I believe he also had a bit of money, so that helped him too. So for years he fought in British politics to have a Brexit. Here's little doggy to say hi. Hello, congratulations on Brexit. Congratulations, everybody. And, for a while they kind of laughed at him, and then they eventually got a vote on the ballot in the UK. Should we leave the European Union or not? And surprisingly, they won. And it was as surprising, almost as surprising, as Trump winning here. So, and the divisions between the pro-Brexiters versus the what were called the Remainers, to remain in the EU, were as stark as the Republicans and Democrats here, in that, the Democrats here are closely aligned with the media across the pond. The Labour Party, which is kind of like the Democrats, only even further left, if you can imagine, they very much had the media sympathies, and they would say that, oh my God, we can't leave the European Union, it'll be a disaster. I mean, it's just like everything they said about Trump. It'll be an absolute disaster. We'll plummet into a depression, and we'll have to beg to come back into the European Union, and it'll cause World War III. And I mean, like everything you possibly think of. It was very hyperbolic. And of course, like what happened with Trump getting in, that just drove people away from Remain. People who were on the fence, and the people who were impacted mostly were people in the areas of the UK who were like here. They would have been the equivalent of the middle of the country. Like here, you got the Midwest. Everything in the middle of the country that's not the coast tends to be, more working people, more conservative. And in the UK, the map is a little different. It's more the north is, the Northerners were more conservative. They had been pro-labor for a long time because labor had been, like the Democrats here, very much pro-worker. But they've gone so far left that, they've driven their base away. So when the Brexit vote happened, the Tory Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, had to craft a Brexit strategy to leave the European Union, but she was at heart a Remainer. She wanted to remain. So the European Union and elements within the UK political establishment did everything they could to sabotage Brexit, to convince people to either have another vote or just abandon Brexit and come back. And this has been going on for I guess over a year now. And it got so bad that they've eventually called an election. And that's they have weird rules in their parliament. I don't really understand them all, but basically you get, the elections get called. They're not the same as here. So the Labour had so many votes, they were actually able to delay calling an election for a while, and Boris Johnson became the new prime minister. He essentially, it's a weird sort of thing where you have to have enough parliament seats to become like the head honcho. But anyhow, they kind of used it would be like if the Democrats ran both houses of Congress and they forced Donald Trump to do things that he didn't want to do, like if they forced him to reinstate the Iran deal that Obama had passed during his administration. That was what they were trying to do with Brexit. They were trying to force him basically to go back, or to make Brexit so unpalatable they'd have to go back to the European Union because it would be the only sensible choice. But eventually they were forced to have an election, and the end result was what I said in another video. The Labour Party got practically wiped out. I mean, they lost seats that they've literally held for over 100 years, or over 80 years, I think. 100 years or 80 years, something like that. A long time for it. So it was a major political change in the UK with regards to this Brexit issue. And then yesterday, finally, the deadline hit. After another delay, they are now officially leaving the European Union. They're out, I guess, and then now begins this long sort of legal slog where they have to do all these things. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that instead of negotiating trade deals for the collective countries, the UK can manage its own trade deals. Yes, they may have to get passports again, and they're going to have their own currency again. I think they kept their own currency. They were one of the EU partners that kept their own currency too. They used both. So I don't think that's really much of an issue. But basically, a lot of people were worried, oh no, I'll have to move back to Europe or whatever. And to which a lot of people responded, well, if you love Europe so much, why don't you just go there? One of the big issues, of course, was immigration, because tons of immigrants from countries like Syria and places in the Middle East kept moving by the hundreds of thousands into Europe and the UK. And the problem was not that they are immigrants. The problem was there were so many of them and they couldn't integrate fast enough. Also, the rules are very different there in terms of getting government assistance. It's much easier in Europe to get government assistance and in the UK. So you had people literally coming over from other countries and going right on to government assistance. So imagine you're starving in a third world, Middle Eastern country, and you could barely survive, and then you waltz into manage to get to the UK, and they set you up in an apartment and start paying your rent. I mean, yeah, you're gonna love it. But there have been all sorts of problems in terms of, again, the integration of a lot of these people. And one of the big problems are there was a lot of Pakistanis, and they had a tremendous problem because in Pakistani culture, I guess you would say, or at least some cultures in Pakistan, there's a real issue with sexual assault. I mean, it's huge. It's very, very old school. Like if someone is raped, they sometimes blame the woman or they punish her. It's that old school. So they've had huge problems with what are called rape gangs in the UK, and these are mostly Pakistani men who are grooming almost exclusively English girls, white English girls, because from their point of view, those girls, they basically dehumanize them, and they don't consider them, they consider them already disgusting and whatever. So they did this. I mean, it's just a huge scandal in the UK, and you can read about it. And it's part of the reason the politics there has completely changed, and it's gone from Labour, which was on the left, and it's gone to the Tories, who are basically on the right. But again, it's a different kind of Tory system. It's a lot like what's happening with the Republican Party here. The Republican Party here finally, thanks to Trump, basically embraced the gays and got rid of most of their identity wedge issues. The Tories have kind of gone through the same process, and so it's a big deal that they're now leaving the EU. Trump can now make a deal with the UK, and he's made it known that he's very supportive of Brexit. So just trading with the United States will probably be more than enough to keep the UK going in terms of trade for the foreseeable future. I mean, you know us. We got plenty of stuff. We got plenty of stuff and money and things to sell you. So good for the Brits. Glad. I know a few Brits out there, and some of them are hardcore Remainers. And again, I just like I tell the Democrats here, you really gotta just kind of accept it and move on. And it's not going to be the end of the world. Yeah, you're going to probably still have some problems. There's definitely going to be a transition period. But in the long run, you're better off running your own country. The people in Brussels, even if you say that they have nothing but good in their hearts, centralization is the enemy. The bigger an entity is, the more people at the edges of it cannot get served, especially when you're talking about the government. I mean, the United States has a massive government now, and we have tons and tons of people who fall through the cracks. They just fall through. There's just too many people here. I mean, we have over 350 million people. It's just impossible to keep track of them all. And so you're better off having a smaller number of people. It's easier to organize. It's easier to have more efficient government systems, if you're going to have government systems. And so in the long run, you'll be better. So relax. The United States has your back. We've always liked the Brits, except right in the beginning. And we're going to look out for you, little cousins. So don't you worry about a thing.